All right, the next session will be a keynote speech by Professor Bob Chambers. Unfortunately, he can't be here with us in person, so I'm going to present the program. Oh, no? Okay, sorry, he's online.
I'm here. Are you ready?
Yes. Okay.
I'm going to share my screen here. And okay, I hope everybody is seeing the screen and can hear me. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. When I accepted, I thought I'd be making the presentation in Canberra and the sunshine. Unfortunately, I'm sitting here in Maryland in the rain in my office at my home. But I'm still delighted to have the chance to make the presentation. I'm going to be talking today about an ongoing research project that I've been conducting in collaboration with Professor Yushang of AMU and some of his current graduate students or past graduate students in Beidou in China. The topic is, I know from listening to the presentations that I've heard already, a bit weird. Given the theme of the conference, but I'm an agricultural economist who's interested in production, so I thought it would be best if I talked about something that I knew a little bit about. So let me go through the basic idea behind the paper. Before I do this, though, I want to emphasize that I'm not actually presenting a paper. This paper is still evolving, and I'm a co-author on it with Mo Yu Chen, who's a postdoc at Beidou, Aizhou Wang, who is a PhD student at Beidou, and then Yusheng. And I want to thank them for doing actually a lot of the work, most of the work. All the computational work has been done at Beidou, and I haven't touched the computer or done anything on that. So, I just lost my slides. I'm not sure why. Let me try again.
Riding the horse.
Excuse me for a second. I'm not really sure what happened here.
Yeah. Horse is very active.
Let me try it this way.
Restart.
Yeah, this isn't ideal, but I think the slides can be read, and given that whatever I had before disappeared, let me actually try to open the file again and try to find it. I don't know why the file is not opening. Okay, I think there is some kind of problem on my PDF reader, so I'll just go ahead and talk about it today. Back to what I was talking about, mechanization schemes, and when we're referring to mechanization schemes, let me see.
So can you hear me?
I'm not really sure what is going on. How about now? Can you see it now?
No, we haven't shared slides for you, is that right? From outside. Oh, actually, it's working.
Okay, it's working now. I think there was just a glitch in my PDF reader. And so I switched to a different reader, so my apologies for that. Anyway, so mechanization services, what we mean by mechanization services, or what we would call custom services in the United States. And the basic idea is that a farmer hires in work that would normally be done by a farmer himself or herself using capital equipment on farm. So we're talking about harvesting services or seeding services, sometimes spraying services. I have to admit, I've never seen this in China, but in the United States, it's very, very common. And in fact, the United States, it's a very, very significant portion of expenditures in agriculture. The basic idea behind machine services is it's to the custom services is that it's to augment labor and facilitate the substitution of labor with capital equipment and other inputs. It also helps the farmer standardize the farming practices because the farmer can rely on specialized equipment that the farmer wouldn't otherwise have happened. So the point that is there are several points that have been issued about this on what are the challenges. One challenge is how close to substitute our custom services for cell phone capital. And this is something actually that we look at empirically in the paper. Second is the high transactions cost that would be associated with actually going out and bringing somebody in to do your harvesting and things like that, rather than just doing it yourself. And then the last point is the issue of the potential for adverse selection. And that has been raised by my co-author Shang in some papers and other people's as well. And so our central question here is, how and why are mechanization services adopted in China? Okay, so we want to do it and look at it in a framework that the first thing we want to do is we want to look at the role of mechanization service in the production activities of small size farms. So I have to emphasize that from a US perspective, these farms are tiny. In a bit, I'm going to be showing you some figures on how small they are, but they're very, very small. Then we want to be able to quantify the substitutability between mechanization services and self-owned capital. And then we also want to look at the rate of return. And this is the key thing that we're doing in the empirical work that I'm showing today. So we want to actually see what is the shadow price or what is the value to the farmer of cell-owned capital versus the cost of mechanization services. And we're actually going to compare those. The data that we're using is from a nationwide farm survey that was conducted over 2003 to 2018. It covers 32 provinces. And the main crops that we're interested in are rice, wheat, and maize. And what we hope to do is to quantify the way in which mechanization services adopted or might be adopted. And we want to be able to do this in the context of the agricultural setting that we're facing. I'm going to go through some slides here. For those of you who are even less familiar with Chinese agriculture than I am. And I want to start by showing you a figure on how big these farms are. if you look at the figure, you'll see the vast majority of these farmers are involved in less than a hectare of land. That is tiny, by anybody's imagination. Around 10% of them are running from about 0.7 hectares to 2 hectares. So in acre standards, that's from 1 to approximately 4 acres. Almost none of these farmers are farming on a larger scale than that. So this is a problem in the sense that you cannot use on such small scale farms many modern implements. In fact, as I've said to Sheng Yu, my co-author, a number of times, you can't even turn around a piece of large scale farm equipment that they use in the United States on any of these farms, or even if on the farm size of a village. Now, some more background here. The slide I want to draw your attention to is the slide on the right, and this shows a pattern from the late 1970s, roughly around the time when they started to liberalize the agricultural sector in China, to the current time in terms of capital investment and infrastructure. Now, one of the comments I want to make about this profile is very similar to the profile that we saw in the United States between 1948 and 1980, when agriculture went from a very labor intensive activity to the most capital intensive activity among the major industries in U.S. agriculture. So what is going on in Chinese agriculture is in fact something very similar. Now, the reason why I think this is important is this figure that I'm showing here. This figure that I'm showing here is giving you an idea of the total output that we've had in grain over the last, it's actually the last 8 years, a little less than 8 years, as well as yield. Now, the yield is, as I hope everyone knows, essentially the crop production divided by the acreage or the hectares. And what we're seeing here is a steady rise in yield. Now, that's coming from the previous picture that I showed you, the capital intensity. So that is coming as a result of capital deepening, and some of this may actually be to technological progress within Chinese agriculture. Now, this again is to familiarize you with an idea of what regions of the country that we're talking about. The very furthest side on the furthest to your left is an average that goes average over the periods. First row is rice, and it shows a couple of things. First of all, the geographic location of where rice is being produced. It's mainly in the northeast and the central to southeast part of the country. And if you look at the figure, you'll see that there's been a change in the intensification since the beginning of the turn of the century. So in fact, we've seen much more intensive and higher yielding in Heilongjiang, Jilin, and some of the other northern provinces, the northeastern provinces. Wheat is in the middle, and wheat has undergone not the same transformation, but it has gone a fairly dramatic transformation from being concentrated or having higher yields in Xinjiang, and then going so that the highest yields are now in this south central, where east central, I should say. Now, one of the things I want to comment about this, that I'm doing some parallel work on Chinese agriculture, and what has happened is in Xinjiang, it has become the center of cotton production in China, and that makes it, largely a center in the world, because China is still the 5th largest cotton producer in the world. So what we're seeing here is people have substituted out of wheat, they've gone into cotton, which we're not talking about, but that's part of the pattern. And then the last thing just gives you an idea about what's going on with maize, what Americans call corn. Now, this is the farm size distribution that is broken down by the specific crops. The one thing to notice is that in rice, the distribution is very, very stable. And wheat and maize, it's changed a little bit. And in wheat and maize, there's been a growth in what I would call the middle size acreage, some people from 0.3 to 0.6 hectares. That's still very, very small. But in fact, there is a shift in the pattern. And one can conjecture, of course, that this may be partially due to the introduction of the custom services. I'm just going to skip this one. Okay. Now, the main reason I showed this slide is Shunyu was trying to convince me to do it, and I wasn't going to show it. But then I realized that this picture of the tractor that's in the lower left-hand corner. To put that in perspective, I have a tractor just about that same size that I use to cut my grass and maintain a 2-acre field here in Maryland. So when we're talking mechanization services, we're talking very, very basic types of machinery as opposed to very large scale services. So the stylized facts. First, we see that the proportion of mechanization services is increasing. We also see that larger farms, and this is drawn from the data, tend to invest in purchasing machinery. And then, as we saw in the picture, there are some substantial differences across the regions, both by crop and by location. Let's skip that. So let's move on to the data quickly. This slide will give you an idea of the magnitude of production we're talking about. Maize is by far the biggest of the three crops. When we look at what is going on in these three crops, however, we see some very, very significant differences. In particular, I'd like to draw your attention to rice. And one of the reasons I want to draw your attention to rice is this foreshadows some results we're going to see in a little bit. Rice is very, very labor intensive. The labor share is about half of the total share of the inputs in production. That is extremely labor intensive. Just to give you kind of a crude idea, in the United States, we think of a breakdown between capital and labor, and we roughly think of labor being about 25% for most industries. So this is extremely labor intensive industry. Wheat and maize, on the other hand, are not as labor intensive. In fact, they tend to rely very, very heavily on materials. And what we're talking about in terms of material are going to be things like fertilizers, pesticides, irrigation, and materials like that. And this reflects the kind of pattern that we see in the United States, for example, in our agriculture, where in fact our crop agriculture is very materials intensive. In fact, our crop agriculture in the United States is materials intensive rather than capital or labor intensive. So now this gives you an idea on what has been happening with the AMS. Now the AMS is what I'm talking about. These are the custom services, the higher capital services per hectare. You'll notice that in both wheat and maize, there hasn't been a lot of change since 2003. There's some up and down And May's, it's slightly higher than it was in 2003, but it's not a large amount higher. So that's a question, is why do we have that stable pattern in wheat and maize? And in rice, we have a different pattern. And in rice, what we see is we see a pattern of increasing use of custom services. And that's something that we want to be able to look at in the data, because if we can explain that, then that will help us explain the pattern of behavior in terms of adopting custom services or not. Self-owned capital in rice is low and doesn't change at all. I mean, maybe varies a little bit and goes up a little bit around 2014, but it is very, very stable. In wheat and maize, it's a little different. There's variability here. So that's telling you that people are investing and disinvesting in wheat and maize. So farmers are making changes to their capital holdings. Now, the other figure I want to show you, and again, I want to draw your attention to rice. You will recall when I showed rice earlier that rice, in fact, was having an increase in the use of custom services. Notice that it's also doing this in the face of an increase in price. Now, of course, the increase in price is partly being driven by the increased use of custom services, so there's a demand effect here as well, but there's also an income effect. And so it's important to recognize that these people are hiring more, even though the price is rising. Now, they've started to level off in the last 5 years, but it's a pattern to note, because it is in fact different than what is happening in both wheat and maize. In both wheat and maize, there's been a slight rise, but nothing nearly as dramatic as what has happened in the custom in rice, excuse me, the conceptual framework. I'm going to go through this really quick. This old-fashioned production economics. We define a technology. So the technology is expressed in terms of an output, and we're going to have an output. In each of the cases, it's going to be a crop. We're having 4 variable inputs. One is the custom machine services. Another one is labor. The other one is materials. And the fourth is land. Quasi-fixed factor that we're including in this is owned capital. This is self-owned capital. This is intentional that we've made this to quasi-fixed factor, because one of our goals is to isolate the returns to quasi-fixed factor. So for that technology, we specify a profit function, which is a quasi-grand function for capital. Then some standard production economics here. We have Hoteling's law and the shadow rules. Hoteling's law just tells us that the derivative of the profit function with respect to the output price is equal to the profit maximizing supply, and the derivative with respect to J's input price is equal to the profit maximizing minus the profit maximizing demand. The shadow price, which is the benefit that the farmer gets from a small change in the capital stock, is obtained simply by differentiating the profit function with respect to the capital argument. In our model, we're actually going to impose constant returns to scale. So this actually boils down to a simple division factor, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, the empirical model specification, going to be relatively brief here. The empirical model specification is standard trans law. For those of you who know anything about production economics, this has been the workhorse model of applied production economics and econometrics for the last 50 years. Since the late 60s, the early 70s, is what is considered to be a second order flexible functional form. It has very nice properties and is very, very well tested. It's used routinely in empirical analysis. We don't actually estimate the profit function directly. What we actually do is we estimate labor, we estimate input share equations. And those are simply obtained by applying Shepherd's lemma. And they have a very, very convenient form in the translog structure because they are linear in parameters, which is a tremendous advantage in estimation. Skip that. I'm gonna skip that because I realize I'm coming up on 15 minutes, on a half an hour. I want to keep my talk for half an hour. All right, so all of this is an introduction to these results that we've got. What we have here is for each firm, we've estimated a model, and the model fits very well. It's in an appendix that I can show you, but the model fits extremely well. And from that, we derived estimates of the elasticities that the sample needs of the cost shares. And so each elasticity, as you read down, if you read across a row, then, for example, when you read the labor row, the labor column is its own price elasticity. The customer service point is its labor's elasticity with respect to customer services, land, etc. All of the signs of the own price effects are negative as theory demands, but empirical analysis doesn't always agree with. But in fact, these are all negative and they are all precisely estimated. And that is true for rice, wheat, and maize. So, I mean, to be honest with you, I find this extraordinary that we have this good a fit for data. What this indicates to me is, in fact, that the farmers we're looking at seem to behave as though they are very, very economically rational producers. Now, one of the reasons I think it's important to say that is because there's a fairly large literature that has started to develop, in particular around pesticides and fertilizers, that is suggesting that farmers are irrational. And irrational in the use of pesticides and irrational in the use of fertilizers. These results suggest the opposite. Now, I don't think that I would claim that these results are conclusive, but they're also very, very consistent with work that I've been doing on pesticide use in China and things. I think the standard models that people look at are missing some obvious things. I'm just put it just very simply that way, and I think, you know, we could have an extended conversation on why that is the case. But these farmers appear to be behaving very, very rationally. Now, when you look at the numbers, the thing that I want to call your attention to is the difference between what is going on in rice and what is going on in both wheat and maize. In rice,
have 5 minutes.
in rice, custom services are a substitute for labor. So they replace labor. In rice, it is a labor-saving input, right? When you look at wheat, however, that negative sign of, say, the wheat panel, so for labor, the custom service elasticity is almost minus 0.7, very precisely estimated, says that they're a complement. So that what that is saying is that an individual who uses custom services is going to be using more labor. And the more custom services they use, the more labor they're going to use. That is also the same in maize. Now, you will recall the figures that I showed you earlier, showing you just how labor intensive rice was. So what we're seeing here is a distinct difference, right, in the role that custom services plays in these different types of inputs. What this is also suggesting very strongly is that custom services are not a perfect substitute for self-owned capital. In fact, these appear to be two different types of inputs. And I'm not surprised at that because I know they are. I mean, when in fact you think of some of the self-owned capital that is going to be on some of these farms, it's not going to be machinery. It's going to be small sickles and other handheld devices. And so, in fact, they are different inputs, and you're seeing this very, very clearly in the price pan. Now, the last figure, these are the shadow prices we came up with. The blue line is, in fact, the shadow price over time from self-owned capital. So it is the marginal return to the producer of increasing self-owned capital by 1 unit. So marginal product times the price, right? You will see that in rice, it has been dropping precipitously over time, right? At the same time, as we've already seen, the custom services price in rice was rising. When you look at wheat and maize, you see a different pattern. You see custom services price rising, but you see a situation where the shadow price of self-owned capital in both wheat and rice, for the bigger part of this century, has been bigger than the custom services price. So what this suggests is, in fact, something that is very consistent with the original figure I showed you on the profile of the custom self-owned capital. You will recall I showed you that the self-owned capital for rice was steady. What this is saying is, in fact, that you have assets trapped in agriculture. Right? You have an assets that are trapped in agriculture, and they're not either going out and they're not being replaced. They're just sitting there. In the other two sectors, then in fact, what you have is a situation where you have a tremendous amount of room, it appears, for wheat and maize farmers to be making investments on farmland. On self-owned capital. So conclusion. I'm just going to say, I'm going to start, say, with number 3. Let me just put that. We've got a lot to learn on this. We're still working on it. And we plan to move on from this into a study on investment patterns that is going to be based on these profit function model and, of course, investment theory. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Question. Can I ask a question? Can you hear me? Oh, so. Can you hear me? No. Oh, can't hear. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we stop here. You can't hear.
So you have to in the system, and then you Switch on the.
Stand at the podium.
I'm having a hard time hearing that.
What about now? You can't hear. Maybe we stop here.
You
It's
have
so
to
polite.
Okay. That sounds good, good or what? Please, Doc.
Continue your question. I think there is time lag.
Time lag.
Time lag.
So I was wondering, how did you calculate labor price?
Actually, I would defer that question. I think Chen Yu is sitting there and
I can answer this question. So, okay. So labor price actually is calculated at the farm level, which is the average at the village, which is the how much of the yuan per day, which is having for each individual person.
The majority of the small farmers
Yes.
are not hiring.
No, of course not.
So
Well,
how did you,
Well, the point was
what's
that.
the shadow price?
Okay, good point. Now, in our labor statistics, there are two groups of labor being used: self-employed versus hired from the market. So for dry land crop, for example, like wheat and maize, usually the hiring cost for each of the external labor is about 200 yuan per day. This is standard, which is changing, varying across region as well as over time. Well, for self-employed, actually, the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs actually tried some imputation, which is considered about additional efforts from self-employed purpose. So there are some bonus additional, which is add up. But the difference between the hired cost versus self-employed is not that much differences. For each of the commodity, actually differences a lot. In our exercise, actually we're using this national farm survey, which is for each of the family. We have, if we have the right price, we use it. But if we don't have, we have the village level type of form, which is providing on average for this village how much cost for hiring, as well as approximation of hot policy computation for the self-employed.
All right.
Mhm.
You need to stand here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bob. Good to see you online. I think you made an important point about the rationalities. The farmers are rational in responding to the price changes. We know in the developed literatures, farmers also responding to the non-price, changes. I'm wondering whether the customer services can be regarded separately from their responses to prices. On average, for developing countries, farmers' response to non-price in terms of elasticity changes is actually higher than their response to the price change. So I think we'll be very interested to dig in much deeper into looking at the behavior of farmers in China about their kind of responses to both the price and non-price factors. Thanks.
I guess, what I would say about that is in response is, closest I've been to a farm in China is Beijing, okay? I take the point that they're going to respond to non-price signals and that there will be a number of things. Effects, as we have in the United States, where individuals are affected by what their neighbors are doing, by the traditions they've established in the way. In the United States, we experience such thing as people having a very hard time going to no-till agriculture, and the reason they didn't go to it because they thought the fields looked messy. And And so we have that everywhere worldwide. But I'm very much a data person. And when I see numbers like these and the fit that I'm getting, it's hard for me to say, look, these people are rational. I can't say that. But what I can say is the data are telling me it looks as though they are behaving as if they are rational. And if in fact we don't pay attention to that, we're going to make a mistake in terms of our policy analysis and in terms of trying to understand their behavior. But I take your point. I think you have to look at both sides of this issue. And I mean, an important part of this analysis is anybody who does this panel data will know are the fixed effects. And the fixed effects and the demographics and everything. And those certainly play a very, very big role in the analysis.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you, sorry to miss you this time, but we look forward to the.
Oh, next time I come, I will see you.
Next time, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob.
Next time I come, I'll definitely see you.
One more question?
Okay, question, sorry.
So,
Well, come here.
who has a question, Bob?
About very nice lecture.
Oh, hey.
This is a-
I was hoping you'd be here. You see it?
I was looking forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah.
You talked about the subsidy in the beginning, but the model I didn't see subsidy in your regressions. You show that the spread of banking services have been slowed down in later years. I guess one of the reasons is due to subsidies. The government still provides heavy subsidies
Right.
to machinery purchase. As a result, many farmers, very large farmers, purchase machinery at a very low cost, so which reduce the demand for mechanical services. This is a big common issue for mechanization service providers. They need to travel to a wider market to get become profitable. So with the subsidies, their profitability dropped. Actually, it disrupt the market, make the whole market less efficient.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we had, actually, that was a point that was made in much more detail in the slides. And that I'm sure you had raised with me in the discussions that we were having. Well, I guess it was my morning. It was midnight last night for him in Australia. It was early morning. And we were having the discussion about that issue about, how the subsidy changes change things and things like that. And, in terms of the aggregate numbers and the overall behavior, I think that's gonna be right. Because I do believe, like I said, I do believe that if these numbers are correct, and I think they are, then in fact, these farmers are behaving as though they're rational. And so, if the subsidies disappear, the use of the service is gonna go with it as well. No, I couldn't agree more.
Okay, thank you.
All right, no more questions. Let's thank Bob for interesting talk.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, we can have lunch.
Đấy, nên nghĩ sao?